Welcome back. We're discussing the internal power struggle among Iraq's Shia political powers with Patrick Coburn, the Iraq correspondent for The Independent and the author of the upcoming Muqtada al-Sadr and the Fall of Iraq, his new book. He's joining us from London. And in Washington, D.C., Raed Jarar, an Iraqi blogger who's a consultant with the American Friends Service Committee. Now, Patrick, your book looks in depth at, I guess, the inner workings of Muqtada al-Sadr's operations and his mind to some degree. And I wonder, from what you know, having written this book and what you know of him and your time in Iraq, could he ever be regarded as a force for the good? Could he ever sort of go mainstream, so to speak, and get a mainstream position in Iraqi politics, as opposed to being seen as a radical Shia militia leader, maybe?
Well, he is, he is sort of mainstream in the sense that he has massive support. It's one of the extraordinary things about US policy in Iraq is always looking for somebody who will agree with US policy but doesn't actually have any political clout other than the support of America. So I don't think that Muqtada has ever been marginal. It's one of the extraordinary, strange things about American media coverage and political coverage is they always refer to Muqtada. For instance, the New York Times called him the renegade cleric. But a renegade from what? He's not renegade at all, or maverick or firebrand. All these are sort of propagandistic terms. Actually, Muqtada's record is of somebody who's very cautious, somebody who always looks at every position, looks at his line of retreat, looks for compromises. Very different from the sort of image you get certainly in the foreign media. And also, this is somebody who has a lot of experience in the 90s under his father, who was later assassinated by Saddam.
Well, you've answered the question I was going to ask you next, which is what do you see as his shortcomings and his strengths. But I wonder then, if you look at the fact that he seems to have majority support among the poor Shia in Iraq, whereas opposed to his opposition seems to have the elite behind them. What happens then if and when the international forces pull out and Iraq is left in a very different position? What does that do to his power base?
Well, presumably it gets even larger. Whatever happens, Muqtada is going to be a very big player, and his supporters are going to be a major player whatever happens in Iraq. It was somehow from the very moment he sort of appeared in 2003, he's been demonized in the foreign media, and there have been a series of attempts to marginalize him and say, you remember Paul Bremer tried to arrest him in early 2004. This led to a sort of general uprising across southern Iraq, tendency to underestimate him and underestimate the Sadrists. And Maliki seems to have done exactly the same over the last week, with precisely the same result, same disastrous result for Maliki as we saw before.
Let's get Mohammed on the line from Bangladesh. What's your question, Mohammed?
Yeah, my question is that why the Muslims should fight among the Shias and Sunnis. We had no difference 10, 15 years back. Okay. Actually, interesting, Mohammed, let's put this question to Raed Jarar. And I guess what Mohammed is raising is the fact that we never really heard about this. So there were obviously Shia-Sunni clashes, there have been for a long time. But why is it now more evident? Is just Iraq the perfect sort of ground for them to oppose each other?
It's an excellent question, in fact. Iraqi Sunnis and Shiites never had clashes in their history. Before 2003, there was no such a thing as a Sunni hating Shia. Or
was that because of the strong hand of Saddam Hussein having shaped the way they lived together?
I am personally half Sunni and half Shiite, not because Saddam oppressed my parents, because people used to intermarry and live in the same place. The former regime was mixed. It was a Sunni Shiite regime. And what's more important than that is that I completely disagree with this notion of saying that the war is happening between the Sunnis and the Shiites. It's like saying the US Civil War happened between the blacks and the whites or something. There is no such a thing as the Sunnis. Which Sunnis are we talking about? Al-Qaeda or the vice president or the armed resistance? Which Shiites are we talking about? Al-Sadr and the nationalists or Supreme Council and the separatists?
So it's been made religious as opposed to the politics, which are more prevalent. Yeah?
So it is a war that is actually putting some Sunnis and Shiites against other Sunnis and Shiites, not because of religious beliefs, but because of their political and economic agendas. So there is no such a thing as a civil war that is happening because of people ancient hatred based on religious differences. It's more a political and economic conflict that will be resolved as soon as the occupation forces leave Iraq completely.
What do you think Muqtada al-Sadr would like to achieve? What do you think his political ambitions are?
Muqtada al-Sadr and other Shiites and Sunnis and seculars and Christians who are nationalists want to reach to a country where it's not sectarian, one united country with one central government, where the state owns all of the natural resources, and there is no foreign intervention, whether this intervention comes from Iran or Saudi Arabia or the US. This is what the vision of the majority of Iraqis, regardless to their backgrounds, is.
Patrick Coburn, an interesting question I would like to put to you is that, obviously, as you said, he's been, Muqtada al-Sadr has been portrayed a certain way as a firebrand and so on in the Western media, which you believe is a bit inaccurate. There was a time, though, when he wasn't such a hater of America, and now he's again painted very much as someone who really is against the US in general. If you agree with that, when was that turning point?
Well, I don't think there was a turning point. You know, from the very beginning, from 2003, Muqtada was against the occupation and said so repeatedly. There was never a moment that he supported it. One could, and he's one of the few sort of opposition leaders who've been completely consistent on this. Now, one could say before the fall of Saddam, was he in favor of Saddam being overthrown? Well, yes, but that doesn't mean he was in favor of the occupation. And this was very much in keeping with, the Sadrist movement was really built up by his father, Mohammed Sadiq al-Sadr, in the 1990s. And what Muqtada believes and does is very much in keeping with his father, who was anti-Saddam, but he was also anti-American. So there was always been a strong Iraqi nationalist strain in the Sadrist movement, and also quite a strong anti-Iranian strain at the same time.
And I think that go ahead, sorry, Patrick, carry on.
Yeah, I mean, just going back to an earlier question of how much sectarianism was there in Iraq under Saddam, I tend to think that Iraqis underestimated how much there was there. There was the Shia uprising of 1991. The tens of thousands of people were killed. But I think, once you have a foreign occupation, it almost automatically increases sectarianism, because even if the imperial power doesn't want to, it depends on divisions within the country that it's occupied, right. And almost automatically it acts to deepen those divisions.
Right.
And I mean, I don't want to beat this to death, but just make a little point. You might have a Shia and a Sunni living beside each other before. They knew they belonged to different communities and so forth. But suddenly, for the Sunni, maybe if the Shia is a policeman or something, he's also a traitor. Right. So the political situation automatically increases, deepens sectarianism and leads to sectarian violence.
And I wonder, Raed, what role Iran plays in all of this now? Of course, it's America likes to play up the role Iran has in Iraq, but from your perspective?
I think from my perspective and the majority of Iraqis who I listen to speaking about the Iranian role, they view it as a negative role, that Iran is interfering negatively in Iraq, but not the same way that the Bush administration portrays it. It's not that Iran is smuggling weapons behind under the borders in the middle of the night without the US knowing. It's actually by supporting some political parties that happened to be the same allies of the Bush administration. The Al-Hakim of the Supreme Council and Al-Maliki of Al-Dawah party. These two parties are Iranian allies and American allies. So when Patrick is talking about how the majority of Iraqi nationalist Shiites hate both. They hate the Iranian intervention and the US intervention and Al-Qaeda intervention. Any type of intervention, they are against all of these types of intervention. I think the latest interview of al-Sadr on Al Jazeera in Arabic a couple of days ago, he stated that very clearly. He said, I met with Khamenei personally and I told him I'm against that al-Sadr movement is not a political or military extension of Iran in Iraq. Leave us alone.
Well, it shows that there's a lot more of a complicated situation there. I thank you very much, Raed. And also, Patrick Cockburn, thank you for being with us, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Patrick Cockburn's new book is, again, Muqtada al-Sadr and the Fall of Iraq. On the next show, we speak with researchers for Gallup, who spent the last 6 years speaking with a large segment of the world's 1.3 billion Muslims to find out what they think about their countries and the West. The results of the massive poll might surprise you. We'll see you for that.